Right, well, thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, my name is Jessica Beare. Thank you for getting the pronunciation of my surname right. That still doesn't happen all the time. And I am the Waste and Recycling Officer at South Oxfordshire and Vale of Whitehorse District Councils. Obviously, we work together. And today I'll be talking to you about waste, recycling, what happens to your waste, a bit about current legislations, and then how COVID-19 has impacted the waste industry. So, where's my mouse? When talking about waste, this is a really good place to start. So what you see in front of you, this pyramid, is the waste hierarchy that came out as part of the European Waste Directive back in 2008. And it orders methods of waste disposal from least favoured option to most favoured option. So at the bottom there, you've got disposal, and that's landfill. That is burying waste underneath the ground. Obviously, we are much more aware now of sort of the negative environmental impacts of using landfill as a method of waste disposal.
That's very interesting.
Can I ask that everyone mutes their microphones? Thank you, sorry. So very few local authorities actually use landfill as a method of waste disposal these days. That, like I say, is in part due to the increased knowledge of environmental impacts, but also they introduced the landfill tax back in 1997, which increases every year. And back in 97, it was £7 a tonne, and as of last year, it was at £94.15 per tonne. So it's sort of to disincentivise both local authorities and obviously sort of commercial waste collectors from using landfill as a method of waste disposal. So if we go up a step there, you've got energy recovery. That's disposing of waste in a way that we can basically generate electricity at the same time. You've got recycling. Recycling is the act of breaking down a product and remaking it into a brand new product. And obviously that's sort of why I'm here today predominantly, but it's quite interesting to note that recycling is only the third step on the waste hierarchy, although there's obviously a lot of positive sort of attention around recycling. There are 3 steps above it that are even more favoured. So you've got reuse, which is the act of reusing a product for its intended use or a new use. Minimization, which is reducing the amount of waste that you produce. And then finally, prevention, which is obviously not producing the waste in the first place. There's a lot more focus on prevention these days. You've got the zero waste lifestyle, and you've obviously got quite a few of these zero waste shops popping up. Supermarkets are getting on board with refill stations for dried goods and that kind of thing. So we're sort of moving up the waste hierarchy, which is what we want. Okay, so in terms of targets and legislations, there are quite a few out there at the moment to help us work our way up that hierarchy. And the first one is an EU target that by the end of 2020, the 50% of UK waste we were aiming for it to be recycled. Unfortunately, we didn't reach that target. We finished at about 46-47% as the whole of the UK. And it's unclear with Brexit sort of what targets we're going to be working towards, what local authorities are going to be striving for, other than the obvious 100%, because that messaging hasn't been decided by central government yet, but it's also not being filtered down to local authority level. So we're very much still in the dark at this point. Back in 2018, the Waste and Resources Strategy was released, and that sets out 5 targets that we are aiming for. That's for all plastic packaging to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025, to eliminate food waste sent to landfill by 2030, eliminate unnecessary plastic waste by 2030, double resource productivity, and eliminate all avoidable waste by 2050. And sort of part of this waste and resource strategy is to stop seeing waste as waste and see waste as a resource. And that's a really important sort of point that's been raised in a lot of waste webinars and seminars at the moment. And the main sort of method being used to meet these targets is extended producer responsibility. It's also known as EPR. And that is basically putting the onus back on a on all producers to make sure that the products that they are manufacturing are made from easy to recycle materials. So up until the Waste and Resources Strategy was released, you know, a lot of that, the financial cost of this went back to local authorities, the disposal costs, but now it's being pushed back onto producers. So that's 100% of all net costs. And so it's basically giving them an incentive to produce these recyclable materials, because if they do not, then they are going to get fined, they're going to get charged. And part of that is the plastic packaging tax, which is setting a levy on items that aren't made from recycled plastics, particularly. And that's set to be £200 per tonne on items with less than 30% non-virgin plastics in them. And at the moment, a lot of this is focused on packaging, but in terms of extended producer responsibility, they're thinking that in the next 5 years, this will expand out from just packaging and sort of go to all other waste streams, so electronics, batteries, that kind of thing. And the final part of sort of the waste resources strategy, which is very much in the limelight at the moment, is the deposit return scheme, which will be there'll be a deposit paid on a plastic bottle, so drinks bottle or a drinks can. And that cost will be split over the whole supply chain, and it will only be, for us, it'll be very small, but sort of 10p or something like that. But it basically, we will get that deposit back when we take these items either to a retailer or a reverse vending machine, and then you get that money back as coupons to spend in the supermarket and things like that, which sounds great and is great, but there again, it's very much targeting what we call on-the-go recycling, which is when people are out and about and then you just end up using a litter bin. There's obviously questions around the fact that that's taking away household recycling. So a lot of people, I imagine in this group, for example, would take those bottles home with you and put them in your recycling bin. However, we will be losing that tonnage in our recycling. All right, so where do South Oxfordshire sit in terms of recycling? So hot off the press, I am happy to announce as of yesterday that South Oxfordshire remains the second best district in the entire country for recycling, with a recycling rate of 64%, which is up 0.7% of last year. So this is for 2019-20. This is our annual recycling rate. We lost out on first place by 0.1% to Three Rivers District Council. So last year it was all about us trying to beat East Riding of Yorkshire, and we did that, but unfortunately we were still beaten by 0.1%, which makes me very upset. But it's okay, we've got next year. So yes, South Oxfordshire are fantastic. We're great at recycling. You were great at recycling. 64% recycling rate, second best in the country. Vale of White Horse is fourth, well, actually joint third now, with a recycling rate of 63.3%. And that's really down to you. It's down to our residents. We've got residents that are sort of very environmentally conscious. You've got a lot of groups like yourselves that are sort of environmentally minded, community action groups. And we also collect garden waste, which really, really helps. We obviously live in we've got a lot of rural properties in our districts, which means we can collect the garden waste. That does add a significant tonnage to our collections. But what we're trying to do is making recycling as easy as possible. So we collect mixed recycling as opposed to source segregated, which is when you'll have obviously the different boxes rather than just the one bin. And we collect all the main recyclable materials. And what we actually do, particularly with plastics recycling, which can be very confusing, we collect on item type rather than material composition. So rather than the type of plastic, we're just looking at the actual item itself. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. However, we do still get issues of people putting the non-recyclable items in their recycling. And to combat that, we have created the OOPS tag, which hopefully nobody in this talk will recognise. But basically, if our bin crews check a bin and they see that there are non-recyclable items in there, they will tag the bin with one of these. It's got some tick boxes on the back so they can tick what's in there that shouldn't be in there. We will tag that bin and they will not return for that collection. So the resident will have to wait another 2 weeks to put that bin back out again. they will have to remove the non-recyclable item. And if there's a lot of stuff that's in that's not recycling, they obviously have to put that into their black bin or take it to the tip. So that's how we combat that. And in terms of the waste and resource strategy, you know, we're obviously in line with that. You can see that we're well above the national target for recycling ourselves, and we don't send any food waste to landfill. So why do we recycle? There we go. So the most obvious one when you think about recycling and disposing of food waste correctly is to save, that would work. Yeah, man. To save the natural world and oceans. So we'll all be familiar with seeing images in the media of sort of fish and mammals choking on, again, particularly plastic, but waste in the oceans. And it's actually estimated that 1 million birds and over 10,000 sea mammals die annually from eating or getting tangled in plastic waste. And the sad truth is that if waste is not disposed of correctly, it will end up in our waterways and it will make its way to the ocean. And there's actually a big patch of rubbish, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the Pacific Ocean. It's 3 times the size of France at 1.6 million square kilometers. And for a long time, we believed that this was caused by predominantly by microplastics, which are the plastics that are smaller than 5 mil. They wash through the filters on your washing machines. But they've actually done some recent studies where they went through that and took samples and found that it's not just these microplastics, it is these bigger pieces of plastic in there. It's basically all plastic. So that's obviously a good reason. Also to save ourselves, there are adverse health effects sort of loosely associated with even reusing a plastic bottle, for example. If we go back to the first point there about saving the oceans, if you are a fish eater, particularly if you eat bottom feeder fish, it's estimated that you will ingest a credit card sized piece of plastic every week, obviously if it's ocean caught. And they are obviously starting to find microplastics in like the Thames and rivers and all this kind of stuff. It's basically getting everywhere. And we also obviously want to save resources and energy. So if using virgin plastic, so non-recycled plastic, to make a 1 litre plastic bottle takes 10 litres of water to make that. And even aluminium and steel cans, although they are now usually recycled, if you are using virgin products, then there's obviously a lot of resources and energy that go into mining these materials. However, it's not all doom and gloom. I'm sure many of you would have seen the David Attenborough episode several years ago now, where the Blue Planet episode, where he showed the effects of waste on ocean life. And following the airing of that episode, there was a 50% reduction in the use of single-use plastics for the year that followed. Unfortunately, after that 12 months, people seemed to forget, and it went back up again. But it just shows that by having the right voice and the right opinion and the right spokesperson, people will respond well to that. Okay, so now we're going to go on to your bins at home. So you will all have a green recycling bin. That is your biggest bin. It's 240 litres. And into that bin you can put, so that's plastic pots, which are yogurt pots or sort of sauce pots, ice cream tubs, margarine tubs, the big sweet tubs that you get, plastic trays of any color, even black. So that's your fruit and meat trays, and the insert trays that go into things like chocolate boxes or anything that's got that flex in it. Drinks bottles, milk bottles, shampoo bottles, and cleaning product bottles. They're the 4 plastics that we collect. It's just that. So when I said before that we don't categorize on item type, we do categorize on item type and not material composition. They're the only 4 that you need to worry about in terms of plastic. If you have something that's plastic and it does not fit into one of those 4 categories, it does not go into your green bin. It's a lot simpler than people obviously think. It's just those 4. And obviously, if you think about all of those four items, they've all got flex. They're flexible plastic. You know, you can really move it with your hand. If it's not flexible, then it's not recyclable. You can also put in, obviously, aluminium and steel tins and cans, aerosol cans, as long as they're empty, glass jars and bottles of any color, paper and cardboard, any tinfoil products, and food and drink cartons such as Tetra Packs. And then you've got a picture there. So all of your recycling should be clean and dry. And ideally, we want it in your bin loose. But if you do need to use a bag, please make sure that that bag is entirely clear. No black bags, no coloured bags. It has to be a clear bag. Yeah, so we ask you to rinse out that recycling, and especially if it's obviously had products in it, food products or shampoo or things like that, it does need to be clean. Get everything out of that. And you do not need to remove lids and labels. Lids and labels can stay on there. We actually encourage our residents to leave lids on plastic bottles, particularly. You can squash the air out and then put the lid back on. So not only does that reduce space, makes more space in your bin, but obviously because we collect this commingled recycling, the glass does tend to smash up in the back of the trucks, and by having the lids on those bottles, you stop the glass going into the plastic bottles, which makes it a lot easier to separate at the other end of the line. All right, so that's your recycling. Now, there are quite a few symbols out there, or there have been over the years, quite a few symbols, and I think this is one of the main sources of confusion for our residents. Understandably, they confuse me until I sort of learned them for this job. So in terms of, yes, you've got this one, which is the sort of classic symbol for recycling. It's called the Mobius loop. It's made from your 3 arrows there. And that kind of symbolizes this closed loop economy that we're working towards. So obviously something gets thrown away and it just keeps going round and round and being recycled and made into new products. However, it's actually now sort of being replaced with this one. This has come out in the last few years. It's made by an organization called, would help if I was on the right slide, bear with me, OPRL. And they've been working very hard with manufacturers. Manufacturers become members with them, and then once they're a member, then they will have this obviously printed on their packaging. And the OPRL do a lot of research with the consumer to understand the best way of getting the message across about recycling. So you will see sometimes that these ones will have check local recycling. And if it's got check local recycling, it means that less than 50% of local authorities do recycle that product. So if it says check local recycling, please do check with your local council, which is us, obviously, because we may not recycle that item. But yeah, that's much clearer. It's much simpler. It usually tends to break down the different parts of the product. So if it was a microwave meal, it would have the sleeve, the tray, and the film, and it would say that on the back: sleeve, tray, film, just to make it very clear for everyone that's reading that. And then you've got the nose, and you've got firstly this one, which is incredibly confusing. It's called the green dot. It's green, it's made from arrows, and it's obviously been created, I believe, with the idea that it will fool the consumer, basically, because anyone looking at that in a hurry who is sort of familiar with the other symbols will assume that means recyclable, sorry. It does not. That means that the producer has made a financial contribution to recycling, but it doesn't mean that the product is recyclable. And then finally, you have this one as well. Not finally, you have this one as well. The X will be a number, and that is showing you the percentage of the material that is made from recycled products, but that doesn't automatically mean that it is recyclable. And then these two you'll just see on paper and cardboard, and they symbolize that it comes from a sustainable forest. So for every tree that's cut down, they plant a new one. Please ignore all numbers as they mean nothing. So by that I mean the resin codes printed on plastic. So that obviously tells you the type of plastic that it's made from, and they have absolutely no bearing on whether an item is recyclable or not in our districts. As I say, if you think back to the slide before, when you've just got your plastic pots, tubs, trays and bottles, that's all you need to think about. You don't need to look at that number and find out which kind of plastic it is. All right, on to your black bin, which is grey in this picture for some reason. So your general waste bin, pretty much everything that just can't be recycled. So you've got your filmy plastics. So bubble wrap, cling film, any kind of wrapper, biscuit wrappers, crisp packets, all that kind of stuff, that is not recyclable. So that needs to go into your black bin. Polystyrene. We don't see a lot of polystyrene around anymore because, again, it's known for being incredibly harmful to the environment. If they estimate that if it ends up in the natural world, it will take up to 700 years to biodegrade. So a lot of shipping companies, things like Amazon, for example, no longer use polystyrene. They'll often use these little bags of air now that you obviously pop and then just put in the bin. Flower pots are not recyclable. Hard plastics, as I was saying before, if they don't have that flex, then it needs to go in there. So things like children's toys or like handles of knives, for example, that kind of stuff, just because it's plastic does not mean that it's recyclable. Tissues and kitchen roll, often made from recycled paper, but the fibers in them are incredibly short to give them that soft feeling. But because those fibers are so short, they can't be recycled. And obviously if they've been used, they wouldn't be able to be recycled anyway, regardless of whether the product itself could be. Disposable coffee cups. I think most people are aware of this now, but obviously they look like they're made from cardboard, but they're actually laminated inside, obviously to keep the drink in there, so they cannot be recycled. And any food stained items, so anything that you can't clean. So pizza boxes are always a good example. Obviously, if you get a takeaway pizza, often they'll have sort of the cheese grease on there. You can't clean cardboard, but the issue is that the food goes moldy. It can actually take up to 2 months from your recycling being collected from the side of the road to being sorted at our facility. So if there is any food remnants in there, then they will go moldy, basically, and that really ruins the recycling around it, particularly as we collect co-mingles. So if you have moldy cardboard, that will sort of spread through all of it. And then blister packs for pills. Similarly to crisp tubes, both of those are made from what we call mixed materials, which means, for example, the blister packs have got the foil on the plastic. Crisp tubes are cardboard, they've got foil sort of inside the cardboard, and then often plastic as well. And we don't have the technologies to separate those different material types, so they cannot be recycled. Then you've got a picture of some non-recyclable items. And then finally, food waste, which is the easiest bin because it's pretty much all food. So that includes tea bags and coffee grounds, eggshells and bones, sort of anything out of your kitchen, off your plate, at the back of the fridge. Doesn't matter what kind of food it is, whether it's sort of carbohydrate based, whether it's meat, anything like that, that can all go in there. We also accept cooking oil. So whether you can either sort of free pour that in, especially if you've got stuff like bread in there, because that will soak it up, or if not, you can put it in a 1 litre plastic bottle and put that in your outdoor food bin. It's very, very good for the process that we use to process the food waste. It's got what we call a high calorific value. So it's very good for producing energy, which is what we do with the food waste. Now, this is a question that I got asked prior to this talk to be prepared for, because I think it's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So bear with me because it's going to get a little bit confusing. Well, it could do. So firstly, we do not accept any compostable or biodegradable packaging. So by that, I mean products like the compostable coffee cups or the napkins that you get at cafes and things like that now. So none of this packaging can go into your food waste. We do not compost our food waste. We compost our garden waste, but we cannot accept it in our garden waste bins either. The only place that you can put compostable and biodegradable packaging is at on your compost heap at home or in your black bin. It's not recyclable by nature. And I'll explain why it can't go in the food waste in the next slide. I haven't actually got garden waste in this presentation, but with our garden waste bins, there is absolutely no way for our crews to know when they lift the lid of the garden waste bin to know whether an item thrown in there, the particular packaging, is compostable or not. And if it were to be taken there, obviously garden waste isn't sorted in the same way that it is at a recycling plant. They go onto large outdoor compost heaps. And because they're outdoor, any packaging there that's not going to break down is going to present a serious litter issue. So we can't accept it in garden waste bins either. But going back to food waste, We can, however, accept any liner specifically. So that can be a compostable liner, but it doesn't have to be. So you can use any plastic bag at the moment. This is how it stands currently. You can use any plastic bag, any compostable liner. You can use bread bags, salad bags, anything that you've got around the house, pedal bin liners if you do need to buy them. But they don't have to be compostable. And the reason that they don't have to be compostable is because they are all removed from the food waste before it's processed, and they all go to the same place, which is to be converted into energy. So obviously, some people feel more comfortable buying compostable or biodegradable liners, and you can, of course, if you'd rather not be buying plastic. But if you've got plastic at home anyway, you can use it because it goes to the same place, basically. And then you've got some lovely pictures of food waste there. And as you can see, they are in, I think they're in bio bags, so they are in compostable bags. But like I say, you don't need to use them. So what happens to your food waste? And hopefully this will make a little bit more sense now as to why we don't accept the compostable stuff. So your food waste is taken to an anaerobic digestion facility down in Wallingford. It looks like this. When it gets there, the food waste is spun round, and as it spins, sort of on this big metal, not drill, but it spins round. The plastic liners, because they're so light, effectively lift out of the food, and then that's what they're sucked out, and then they're sent over to the incineration plant to be converted into electricity. Once that's happened, the food waste is macerated, so it's chopped up, it's mixed with water, and it becomes a lovely food waste soup. That is pasteurized, and then it is pumped into these huge tanks that you see there. Those tanks are all sealed, and basically what happens is they are heated up to 37 degrees, which is obviously body temperature, so they effectively mimic the human stomach, and then they are stirred for approximately 85 days. Now, while they're in there, it's a completely anaerobic environment, which means there is no added oxygen, or there's very small amounts of oxygen added as to control the limits. And the reason that it's anaerobic is it means that we can accept all kinds of food waste, including particularly meat products and bones and all those kind of things that you wouldn't be able to put on a compost heap, because we can control anything coming out of it. But compostable and biodegradable products require oxygen to break down. So if we had that in the food waste, if it were to go into those tanks, it just does not break down. And as those tanks are stirred at 37 degrees for 85 days, as I've said. And while that's happening, obviously the food waste breaks down, it produces methane, and that methane is captured and turned into energy, and that produces enough electricity for 4,800 homes. But at the end of the process, we remove all of that sort of broken down food waste, and it gives us a really, really nutrient rich digestate fertilizer. So we can't accept the compostable and biodegradable stuff because it won't break down, and it will be in that fertilizer, which means we then can't use that. That's sold on to local farmers to be spread on croplands. So it's, food waste is fantastic because you've got this real circular process going on. And the compostable and biodegradable stuff just wouldn't make it through it, and it would break up that circular process. Oh, I did include garden waste. There you go. Sorry, my mistake. So yeah, your garden waste is taken, if you do have a garden waste bin. Obviously not everybody does. It is a paid for service. It's taken down to the same facility as the food waste down in Wallingford, but it's composted in a much more conventional manner on these large outdoor heaps called open windrows, which look like that. They're actually a lot bigger at our facility. And so it's composted completely normally, and that compost is sold on to local farmers as well, similarly to the fertilizer from food waste. And obviously, historically, we have done our annual compost giveaway, which is where we allow residents to come and collect their own compost. Obviously, due to COVID, that hasn't gone ahead last year. It doesn't look like it's going to go ahead this year. So it's a no-go at the moment. And then obviously, as I mentioned, no compostable packaging, and that was for the reasons I mentioned before. Our crews can't see them, whether they're compostable or not, and as you can see, it would present a serious litter risk. All right, so your black bin is sent to an energy recovery facility up in Ardleigh. It looks like this. You can see it from the road if you're driving up north. And at Ardleigh, the waste is incinerated. And by doing this, we are actually generating enough power for over 60,000 homes across Oxfordshire, and that number is constantly increasing as the new build properties become more energy efficient. And by using incineration, we've actually diverted 95% of our general waste from landfill. Whenever I talk about incineration, I do get a lot of concerned residents in terms of emissions. So the facility uses a whole host of technologies to scrub their emissions. If you visit their website or our website, actually, we've got the link there as well. They have made a sort of a tour video, which will be able to explain it a lot more eloquently than myself. But they scrub the emissions, and they have to report the levels of sort of particulate matter and things like that in their emissions to the Environment Agency almost hourly. And the Environment Agency has set an upper limit, basically. And if the facility were to go over that upper limit, they would be walloped with an absolutely enormous fine. So they keep that limit well below, their levels well below that limit. So emissions aren't something that we are concerned about. And at the end of the burning process, the metals that haven't burned are sent on to be recycled at specialist facilities, and the ash is used in construction, particularly in road construction. All right, and then recycling. So your recycling is picked up from curbside and it is taken to a transfer station locally, which is where it's tipped out from the normal bin lorries. We have a very small team of people who will be waiting for that waste and the recycling, and they go through it with litter pickers and basically pull out anything that obviously shouldn't be there that they can see. And what you've got to understand is obviously there are tons and tons of recycling compressed in the back of these vehicles, and every day they're coming in constantly. We have quite a few rounds that go out across both districts, and they all go back to the same place. So it's constantly being tipped, and they're having to go through it as fast as possible. So they're not going to be able to remove everything from that. They can only take out the very obvious things like black bags, for example, or pillows and duvets that somehow make their way into there. Once they have done that, we also have these large HGV lorries that are coming up constantly, and the recycling is loaded into the back of them using a JCB, and it's compacted, and then that's driven down to our material recovery facility down in London in Edmonton. So that's a nice picture there of a rubbish recycling truck tipping at our transfer station. When it gets to Edmonton, I'll go back one actually. When it gets to Edmonton, this huge HGV will tip out all of the recycling, and the facility there will go and scan it almost sort of meter by meter to find out what we call the contamination rate, which is the percentage of things that aren't recyclable per meter. If that rate is too high, then the facility will reject the entire load. So everything that's in that huge HGV will be rejected based on what they're finding, basically, which means it will get loaded all back up onto the HGV, rejected, and it will be taken to be incinerated. Which is why it's really important that people put the right thing in their bins, because it doesn't automatically get to the point of people picking things out of it. If it gets rejected, it's such a waste. So, a few very contaminated bins can cause an inordinate amount of damage to our recycling. If, however, it is clean recycling and it's good to go, it will get loaded onto a conveyor belt, and a team of pickers will take out anything else that shouldn't be there, basically. That conveyor belt then goes underneath a magnet. The magnet removes the metals. It vibrates, which will vibrate off all the paper and cardboard. It is then scanned with infrared technology, which picks up exactly where the plastics are on that conveyor belt, so that when it goes over an edge, there are blasts of air that shoot that plastic off, so that you're just left with the glass. All of those different material types are then treated. So, for example, plastics are melted down, the dyes are removed, and it's turned into a pellet form. The glass is smashed up into an aggregate form. The paper and cardboard are baled up, and that is what is then sold on to to be recycled into brand new products. that moves very nicely onto our next slide, which is end destination data. So this is, where does the recycling go? Probably one of the most common questions that we get, particularly with a lot of a few stories in the media about reporters finding sort of recycling dumped in fields overseas, etc. And that it's quite important to sort of note that recycling is a commodity. It has an economic value. Dumping recycling is effectively dumping money. It boosts our economy, it boosts us as a county, us as a district. It does have an economic value to it, which is why we obviously want to encourage recycling as well. It helps us finance the services that we provide as a district council. Also, markets vary massively. So end destination data will vary month by month, depending on the supply and demand of a certain product in a certain country. So you can see from this table here that for the 2018-19, it looks to be that all of our end destinations were in the UK and Europe, which is fantastic in a lot of people's minds. It's important to note that a lot of these companies will have been brokers, which means they sell it on further afield. And we don't have a control over that, what they're doing with it. But as far as we're aware, we're doing the right thing. This is all reported to DEFRA on a quarterly basis. We have to feed all of this back, and it is publicly available if you do want to have a look yourself using Waste Data Flow. That's the website that it's reported to. It's quite a complicated website. We do have a user guide, so if anyone does, fancy having a look, do send me an email and I can send you the guide. But yeah, it varies a lot. There's a supply and demand. It's a market. And unfortunately, the sad truth is that the UK doesn't have a recycling infrastructure. It doesn't exist. There were talks that sort of at the beginning of COVID that maybe, COVID was a sort of the push that we needed to create this recycling infrastructure within the UK. Whether or not that will happen, I don't know. But there, I think there was also sort of a bit of a feeling when I've spoken to other groups and residents that we used to send our plastics to China, and people for some reason think that's awful because it's so far afield. But recycling, China have got incredibly high standards of the plastics that they accept, and also a huge proportion of the recycled plastic items that we use day to day will come from China, and they're a very important key player in recycling. All right. Recycling barriers. So we do obviously, I think I've mentioned quite a few barriers throughout this talk to recycling. The most important one is contamination, as I say, which is putting the wrong thing in the bin, in your recycling bin. And there are 4 big contaminants that we sort of deal with and that we find the most. And that is nappies, textiles, food waste, and black bin liners. There are serious implications to having these products sort of in the bins further down the line, in particular nappies and food waste. They're obviously wet. We talked about the cardboard earlier on in the talk, how obviously moldy cardboard will spread, and that really is the case with obviously all food waste, but also nappies as well. They're obviously not recyclable, and they do need to go into the black bin. Black bin liners are an issue is because we cannot see what's inside. So the reason that we encourage recycling being in the bin loose or in a clear bag is that our crews have to see what's inside it. And often at our transfer station, we do find that the black bags are the ones that are hiding food waste or nappies. In terms of textiles, I think in our districts, I'm of the belief that there's a bit of confusion there because we do offer textiles collections. You can recycle textiles by putting them in a tied carrier bag next to your green bin, but I think somewhere along the lines, maybe in word of mouth, this message is getting broken down. But they're not recyclable in with your normal recycling. It has to be presented in a bag next to your green bin, and the same with small electricals, but that's next to your black bin. The textiles are sent off to charity to be sold on, or if not, to be shredded down into rags. And small electrical items are taken apart and recycled for parts. So it's fantastic. But yeah, we do have issues with them being in the bin, the recycling bin. And these are some pictures of recycling contamination for you. I hope that you've all eaten already. And you can see that that's obviously food waste in what would otherwise be, you know, perfectly good recycling. You can really see how much it can spread in such a short time. It really does have a big knock-on effect. And we also have issues with what I call blanket approaches of certain environmental movements. So, for example, the demonization of plastic is a prime example. Obviously, I have mentioned plastic quite a lot in this talk, but it gets a really bad rap, plastic. Plastic bottles are incredibly easy to recycle. They're although we don't want to encourage people to use them, obviously, like I say, they're very easy to recycle. They have a high value, and the demand will always be there. But people don't want to use them, so maybe they'll go for sort of aluminium cans instead. But that's not necessarily, you know, that's still a single-use product. The best thing, obviously, would be to use something reusable. But people just sort of get hung up on one message that obviously, if spun very well in the media, will ruin it. It will ruin something, for example. Again, if we talk about the compostable packaging or the biodegradable packaging, when the National Trust magazine first switched to their cornstarch wrappers, they had a message on it that said, "Put me in your food bin." And I remember receiving that magazine, and I was absolutely horrified by it, because I was, you know, you can't put it in our food bin. And we did get quite a few queries about that, particularly that magazine wrapper. And that's just a prime example of how sort of a blanket approach just doesn't work on a local authority level. Local authorities, unfortunately, differ, you know, in what we collect, what we can recycle, because of depending on the facility that we use. So it just shows it really, the big blanket sort of national things don't necessarily filter down to us, and that can produce a barrier in recycling. I will say that the National Trust changed that message, so I don't know if they got pushback from local authorities or some kind of organisation, but they did change it, so it said check with your local authority, I believe. And actually, I think most recently, now I heard this in a webinar today, that they're talking about, obviously, this the recent panorama on fly tipping. And they just showed how, well, I think it was quite disheartening for a lot of people in the waste industry, because it just showed that the public don't, you know, we thought sort of we're all on our side, and unfortunately they're not all on our side. And I believe that Eric Pickles said that everyone has the right to put things in one bin, which, you know, it doesn't help our case when we've got someone who has a voice spreading the wrong message. We want more David Attenboroughs, and less things like that, less comments like that, please. All right, and then finally, how COVID-19 has impacted the waste industry. So we talked about the legislations at the beginning, the extended producer responsibility, deposit return system, and plastic packaging tax. They were all delayed. So they were supposed to be coming in last year. Parliament was supposed to be meeting in March, and that obviously got suspended. However, again, as of today, I have learned that, let's see, so the extended producer responsibility is going to be introduced in April 2022, and there is a consultation this month. And then the waste regulations on packaging are going to be coming in 2023, 2024. The deposit return system is going to be picked up in this year at some point. They're not entirely sure when, but obviously these are all things that were supposed to start last year. Scotland was sort of at the forefront of the deposit return system, and they actually postponed it by over a year. I don't think that's now coming in until July 2022, and that was supposed to be in last year. We also had issues with import and export of packaging, as obviously, as I've mentioned, a lot of our plastics came from China. Some of you will remember back at the beginning of lockdown 1, we had a shortage of hand sanitizer, And a lot of that wasn't actually an issue with the hand sanitizer itself, because that was being manufactured in the country. It was the fact that the little plastic bottles that it comes in were all stuck on ships out at sea because they were coming from China. So that obviously had a knock-on for us in terms for the waste industry in terms of recycling as well, because particularly commercial recycling, with the shops closing as well, there was a huge drop in the amounts of recycling being sent from commercial sources. And then if you remember the slide where I showed you what happened to your recycling, you had that team of people around the conveyor belt. We had there were obviously a lot of strict social distancing restrictions there, which meant there were reduced numbers working. So they couldn't accept the recycling as fast as was needed, really. And that didn't work well with the fact that we had a huge increase in household waste. Because of every type. So you can see there that the first two groups of columns are March 2019 and March 2020, and then it goes on to April and then May. So you can see that there was an increase in all of our bins, all of the waste that we were collecting. We were seeing what we call Christmas levels, which is the recycling always spikes at Christmas because everyone's got boxes and stuff like that. And that was happening constantly because everyone was shopping online, so everything was arriving in cardboard boxes. Everyone was cooking at home, so they were producing more food waste, and yeah, general waste went up as well. So we were producing more waste, and the material recovery facility was struggling to accept it at the rate that we were producing it. And then that again was not helped, or did not help, the fact that we also had increased staff shortages due to COVID. So we had a lot of people off, either shielding or with COVID. And obviously, if you're a bin man, you can't socially distance. You're in that cab with your crew. And although that we don't mix crews and we don't mix vehicles, and it's the same people, so they're effectively bubbling. If one person gets it, it takes down a whole crew, which takes down a whole round. Biffa were fantastic throughout 2020. Biffa were fantastic throughout 2020. Despite this, we couldn't. I'm really sorry. I'm picking up feedback from someone. I'm very nearly finished.
Oh, I know. I support information.
Okay, right. So, Biffa were fantastic. Despite this, we did not drop any collections in 2020. We were one of the few local authorities that didn't. However, obviously, if you are a garden waste customer, you will know that this year at the beginning of the year, we did have to suspend our garden waste collections. That new variant of the virus that sort of came back, or the second wave of the virus, I should say, hit us even harder than it did last year. So we were really struggling with staffing. But fingers crossed, we're on the up and up now. And that is it. I spoke a little bit longer than I normally do there, sorry. So I'm going to open the chat box. I think if I stop sharing my screen, there are my email addresses there, but I will stop sharing and then I should be able to see you all again. And I will open the chat box, and I think people can, I'll answer it first before they turn their videos on. So where do we check with stickers? So you can do that by emailing the waste team, and I'm happy, I'll just type the our email address in the chat box here. So that's just wasteteam@southandvale.gov.uk, and that email will come to me. Basically, it will come to me or my colleague who's also a waste and recycling officer, and we'll be able to answer that, or on our website as well. Some flower pots have a recyclable symbol on them. Should this be ignored? In our districts, yes, because we don't collect them. So as far as we're concerned, they're not recyclable. And they're not one of the plastic items that we collect. A lot of tea bags did have plastic liners. Can they really be put into the food waste caddy? Yes, they can. They are accepted by our food waste facility. That is a question that I get as well, particularly I think because of the glue, but it does break down. Crisp tubes not okay, but Tetra Pak is okay. Are they not the same sort of laminated material? No, they're not. So yeah, Tetra Pak cartons, we do have the technology to separate, but we do not have the technology for the crisp tubes. I will say though that the very popular brand of crisp tubes, or crisps that come in a tube, I heard on the radio before Christmas, were redesigning their iconic tube to make it recyclable due to mounting pressures from consumers. So that's good. Does PLA also count as compostable and therefore not recyclable? Can you, Lorna, are you able to clarify what you mean by PLA? I think you can turn your video, or yeah, there we go. I think you're doing it. No? There you are.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, you may have to Google to get the exact details on it, but I think it is plant-based. So I don't know if it counts as compostable. I think it's just like corn.
Right. So like the like cornstarch stuff.
Cornstarch, yeah.
Yeah. So that it's the same. So that's the same as compostable, biodegradable.
So you can put it on your own compost, but
yes.
nothing.
Yeah.
Is that going to change? Are you guys going to start picking up compostable from the roadside?
We won't be. No. It won't be a collection that we pick up. I mean, the amount of manpower and the financial input into creating a whole new collection would be sort of exponential. We would have to have tons and tons of it being produced, and also it's where we take it. If it was just compostable packaging, it would have to go to a specific sort of an industrial composter, which is also like almost an entirely new contract with that place. Obviously, we choose anaerobic digestion because we've got a local facility, and it means that we can accept more of the food waste, which is obviously where more tonnage lies. So that's not going to be something that we as a local authority do. And I have been asked that question before as well, whether there's anywhere locally that accepts it, but I wouldn't know. And I think that I'm not sure that composting facilities would sort of be open to the public to accept them, but I couldn't speak for them entirely. But it's, as a local authority, it's not something that we're going to be doing.
Okay, that's great to know, because it sounds like it should be something people will want to start using, because it sounds better than recycling, but I understand it. Yeah, it's that much harder to recycle.
Yeah. And recycle, as I say, it's all right, it's all good. But as I say, recycling has got, it's more like, it's lower on the waste hierarchy, but it does so much for sort of the economy as well, which is obviously why we do promote it. But thank you. Don't want you to.
This has been so educational. It's been amazing. I just think we should be shouting to everyone about this. Being
Brilliant.
Second in the country is just incredible.
Oh, we'll be doing a press release. Don't you worry.
It's
all right. What about egg boxes and trays? Yep, they're absolutely fine. The cardboard ones, I'm assuming. I don't know if you can even get any others now, but yep, they're recyclable. That's perfect. It's cardboard. What is the best way to dispose of shredded paper? So shredded paper can be recycled. You can put it in your bin, obviously loose or next to your bin in a cardboard box, but just be aware of the weather, basically, obviously, because it can blow away. But you can also put it in a clear sack next to your green bin. We do collect it. Oh, that's Phil Fletcher to everyone. Dave, put it in your garden compost heap. What is the reject rate, and is it getting lower? Our contamination rate, which is, I think, pretty much the same as rejection rate, is about, I think the last value that was publicly released was about 12%, and it does seem to be getting lower, yes. Obviously, as our recycling rate goes up as well, hopefully that will start dropping down a bit as well. Is the largest amount of contaminants crisp packets? Hopefully I answered that with the black bag, textiles, food waste and nappies. They're the four biggest, particularly black bags, and I'd say food waste as well. I thought the National Trust was saying with those cornstarch bags using your food bin as a liner. I could be wrong, that's how I understood it. Possibly. I thought the first time I saw it, it was put me in your food bin, but then when I say they changed the branding, I think that's what they changed it to. But again, I may be wrong, but that's how I've always remembered it for that moment. Basic question: if we use paper plates, do we also need to rinse the plate before putting it into recycling? Does it trouble the machine if there's food left? If you're using paper plates and there is food on it, it can't be recycled. If you washed it, I would be concerned it would get wet, and we don't want to accept wet. Like having wet paper and card in your recycling is has the same sort of result as having, not quite as bad as food waste, but the wetness gets moldy too. it's not a case of troubling the machine, it's the case of that's spreading through the food waste spreading throughout the rest of your recycling. If it's very obvious when a recycling bin's got food waste in it when you lift the lid, because it smells. So if you have food waste in your recycling bin and it smells, the crews won't take it. So with paper plates, I would be inclined to put them in your black bin. It's a single-use product. It's the same sort of thing, and it's because you've used it, I would say it's not recyclable. If you haven't used them, then obviously they can be recycled, but otherwise I would be inclined to put them in your black bin. Can you recycle margarine tubs? Yes, you can. That's a plastic tub, so that's good in your green bin. What about the Bin Zone app? Do most people have it? It's a really easy way to check what goes in which bin. Yes. So I don't know if you noticed, there was a big space on my recycling barriers page there. So I normally do have Bin Zone advertised there. That is our app. For those of you that don't know, you can search items and it will tell you which bin it goes into. It does still exist. We are not promoting it as much anymore because we're having some issues with it from a technical point of view. So especially if you had it over Christmas, you might have noticed that. But yes, you can use Bin Zone. It's also a web tool. If you go on our website and type in Bin Zone, it's like a search engine on there as well. So that will tell you what goes in each bin as well. And if there is ever an item that you search that's not on there, do send us an email because I can add it. Pila's cornstarch liner, thank you. It often needs to be heated and needs to be industrial composted, rarely home compostable. Vegware biopack, decent packaging, only industrial compostable. Yeah, even vegware is not, is questionable in the waste industry. I think some people have done some studies where they bury it under the ground and see how long it actually takes to break down, and it's not quite what they're saying. And that's obviously the home they advertise as being compostable. I have a visual question. I'm intrigued. Gordon, or not Gordon, Liz.
No, I'm Liz now. I've got one of these on my fridge, and I want to know if this is out of date now, because on this one, if I look up plastic carrier bags, it tells me to put it in my recycling.
I was really hoping I was going to get through a talk without someone asking me about carrier bags. And
the Bin Zone app says the same thing. Yeah.
I'm asking not because I throw out carrier bags very often, because clearly you don't get them like you used to, but like when you get your Amazon parcel and it has got those inflated bubbles, I always thought, oh, that's like a carrier bag, so I can pop it and stick it right in recycling.
Okay, so yes, that our recycling wheel is still in date. To answer your first question. Second part of the question, the plastic that comes in an Amazon poppy packet thing is not the same as a carrier bag. Wow. So sorry. The carrier bags, they make me sweat, which is why I said I was hoping that I'd get through one without someone asking. I never do. It was a bit optimistic. So carrier bags are what we call non-target at the moment. So for a long time, there was an end market for carrier bags when we recycle them. Then that was China. China then turned around and stopped accepting the plastic because it was such low quality and so light and hard to work with. It didn't make sense for them. There wasn't a market, basically. So we lost that market. We're hoping it's going to come back, like for all, for filmy plastics. It will come back, but rather than change all of our messaging, which is all over our website, all over our wheels, all that kind of stuff, and confuse our residents by turning around and saying you can't recycle plastic bags, and then having to turn around again in a year and go, now you can. We still accept them in recycling bins, and that's because, as I say, they're known as non-target, which means they're not a contaminant and they're incredibly easy to remove at the recycling facility, because they can just pull them out because they're so light and they're not dirty and they're not food waste, that kind of stuff. So that basically they're not recyclable anymore, but we will accept them in a recycling bin. It's much better to use those plastic bags to line your food caddy, or take them down to the bins at supermarkets, because I think that they obviously will be paying an extortionate amount to recycle them at specialist facilities. So yeah, that's why I sweat, because it's one of those things that's like, oh, it's not actually recyclable, but we let you put them in the bin, and it's a bit of a grey area, basically. So hopefully that somewhat answered your
Well,
question.
you've got the difference between the story that you want to give to the mass market and the people on this call today who are pretty much self-selecting. You know, actually, you're preaching to the converted here, probably mostly, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Which is sometimes great, but it's
Yeah.
sometimes not great, to be honest, preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're a tricky one, plastic bags. But like I say, we're hoping that market will come back, because although, like you say, you get plastic bags less now, people do still get them and still use them.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome. Do you put items in the Henley Standard on a regular basis? There seems to be a regular column for health and environment matters. We don't. We have a communications team that sort of deals with all of that stuff. So it's not me. But so unfortunately not. I mean, I've been in the Henley Standard, but for my job, but not for this. Blocks of flats using communal bins do not have a food waste option, meaning food waste ends up in the black bin. Blocks of flats do have a food waste bin. It's a blue bin. It's the same size as the black bins that individual properties have. If you live in a flat and you do not have a blue bin, then you need to talk to your managing agent or landlord, because you should have one. Recycling often gets picked up with the black bin collection. When I contacted the council, I was told it must have been contaminated. How can we help people using communal facilities to recycle better? The message going out tends to be aimed at single households which have all the right bins. So flats are, contamination in flats is a national problem. There is no accountability in flats. So it's very easy for people to get away with not recycling, because you can't trace it back to a single person like you can with individual bins. We are currently working on an absolutely enormous project targeting contamination in flats and recycling in flats. But we obviously do have specific all of our messages, that they don't tend to be directed at individual properties. They are directed to all residents. We are quite careful about not discriminating. But yes, you should have a food waste bin. If you don't, like I say, contact your managing agent. If you don't get anywhere with them, do email us as well, and we can chase up the managing agent and make sure that you have one. And in terms of the collections, the green bin at the same time as the black bin, yes, it probably would have been contaminated if that was the case. But if it happens again, get back in contact with us and BIFA as well at the time that it happens, and make a note of the registration number that did it. I have to run, I'm afraid. Thanks so much for a good, brilliant. What about all the Amazon popping plastic? Is that all general waste? Yes, basically. And I think that is it, unless anyone else has any other questions. I'm going to post that survey link again there at the end of the chat box. Oh, no, that's a direct message. Everyone in meeting, there you go. I would be really, really thankful if as many people as possible could complete that survey. It's just a way for us to try and compile some feedback on these talks and on me, which is a bit concerning. But yes, it would be really helpful if you could just fill that out for me. And I don't know, there we go, Patrick's back.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jessica. We will save the chat, and that we'll put that message out to anyone that took part with the survey link as well. And thank you very much indeed for that presentation. That was very informative, and thank you very much for your honesty with dealing with the plastic bags, because that's the two controversial areas, are the biodegradables and also the thin plastic bags. And I think it's helpful to know. And of course, everyone should remember reuse is better than recycle. So if you can reuse those plastic bags, then that's all the better. So I just will say on behalf of everyone here, Jessica, thank you very much indeed for a really excellent and really informative presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll leave you there then.
Patrick,
yeah,
I just come in there. On the 23rd of March, we have the Rotary Club have a webinar featuring Jess Baker-Pike from Ardley. So there you will learn how the black bin waste is handled. So it's incinerated, and she will give a talk on that. So the 23rd of March, a webinar. I'll send you details so that you can promote that.
I will make sure, and I think Lily's on this. One of the comms team will make sure it goes out to all our members, everyone on this webinar. Thank you very much indeed, Philip. That's really useful.
I'm going to just leave you. I was going to say Jess Baker-Pike knows a lot more about the scrubbing technologies at Ardley as well. I do know Jess. I work with her, so she's good luck with that, and she'll be able to tell you all about that. But I'll leave you. Okay.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you. Bye.
And finally, thank you very much to everyone that's joined in on this. It's really heartening to know that there are so many people really interested in the topic. Thank you all.